Good evening, you're watching News Mongolia on MNB World, and I'm your host, Erdene Inhamoklan. For our top stories, Prime Minister Oyun-Erdene participates in the 16th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention. The Embassy of Mongolia in Paris celebrated Mongolian Republic Day. The air pollution in the capital is made up of 55.6% from gear districts and 28.9% from vehicle emissions. For other news, stay tuned. Prime Minister Oyun-Erdene represented Mongolia at the 16th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention, urging bold collective action to decisively tackle climate change, land degradation, and desertification. Highlighting initiatives such as Mongolia's push for an international coalition on sustainable pasture land and clean energy reforms, the conference addressed global challenges and emphasized the need for unified innovative solutions. Under the theme Our Land, Our Future, this session addresses a broad range of issues, including the implementation of land and soil restoration goals, countering drought and desertification, promoting environmentally friendly food production, advancing women's land ownership rights, enhancing youth participation, and creating job opportunities. Amid the urgent challenges posed by climate change and land degradation, the session emphasizes strengthening mutual understanding among nations. Prime Minister Oyun-Erdene of Mongolia called for bold decision-making to overcome these pressing challenges. To protect the land that is the future of humanity, we must support our environment more than ever before. In essence, nations must stand together for each other. Both the pandemic and the climate crisis have reminded us of this. During the pandemic, we were not fully able to stand for one another. That is why we are echoing the message of the COP17 slogan, "One for all for one," and urging everyone to unite under this principle for action. Mongolia is also proposing an international coalition on sustainable pasture land and land issues for the future during the 17th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention to combat desertification. I am confident this initiative will be thoroughly discussed in the coming days.
Mongolia is participating at this conference with several objectives. Firstly, we're addressing how to combat desertification, which affects 77% of Mongolia's territory. This is not a challenge Mongolia can face alone. We must work together with other nations. What policies are the countries implementing? How can we collaborate? What are the immediate, medium-term, and long-term measures we should take to tackle desertification? These are the core issues we're focusing on, including raising funds through aid, grants, and project financing.
Mongolia has expressed its initiative to establish an international coalition on sustainable pasture land and land issues for the future during the 17th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention to combat desertification. Mongolia is also prioritizing a transition to clean energy, supporting clean energy production, and has begun implementing significant reforms in investment and tax policy to promote this transition. The government has called on governments, investors, sovereign wealth funds, and private sector entities to work collaboratively on these mutually beneficial projects. The Embassy of Mongolia in Paris marked the centennial of the proclamation of the Mongolian People's Republic and the adoption of the first constitution, commemorating this significant milestone in Mongolia's history. The event highlighted the nation's rich past and its evolving role in global diplomacy, showcasing the long-standing partnership between Mongolia and France, especially in culture, politics, and education.
The ceremony held at the Embassy of Mongolia in Paris not only honored tradition and pride, but also provided a valuable opportunity to promote Mongolia on the international stage and to strengthen mutual understanding between France and Mongolia. France is a third neighbor and partner country that upholds democracy and human rights. It was emphasized that every event participant contributed significantly to taking cooperation between the two countries to a new level. The adoption of the first constitution laid the foundation for Mongolia to stand alongside all other nations and contribute to global cooperation. This milestone, achieved 100 years ago, set the stage for Mongolia's full membership in the United Nations in 1961 and the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization in 1962. Mongolians have respected gender equality since the 13th century. This tradition was reflected in the first constitution, which granted men and women the right to vote and be elected without distinction. Mongolia achieved this gender equality 20 years before France, giving men and women equal voting and election rights. During the ceremony, Philippe Latombe, the president of the France and Mongolia Parliamentary Friendship Group and a member of the French Senate, emphasized that the centennial marked a remarkable achievement for the Mongolian people. He also highlighted that the event provided an opportunity to strengthen dialogue between the French and Mongolian parliaments.
I lived in France during my 15 years of working with UNESCO and became somewhat acquainted with its history and culture. I believe Mongolians should pay more attention to France, and Mongolian youth should study the French language. French culture is global and holds an immense heritage we must learn from. French universities also have relatively low tuition fees. Our universities in Mongolia should expand their collaboration with French institutions.
Everyone should know their history and every citizen should be familiar with the Constitution of Mongolia. This event organized for Mongolians abroad was very well received. It helped us understand a lot of things. The Embassy of Mongolia in Paris also serves as the country's UNESCO Permanent Representative Office, responsible for Spain, Portugal, Andorra, and Monaco. An event for the 100th anniversary of the adoption of the first constitution was also organized in San Sebastián, Spain.
Ulaanbaatar city's air quality continues to face challenges, with recent data highlighting the significant role of urban infrastructure and transportation in pollution levels. As the city evolves, the interplay between residential patterns and vehicle usage shapes its environmental landscape.
A recent study on air pollution in Ulaanbaatar reveals that in 2020, 55.6% of the city's air pollution came from Ger districts, while 28.9% was attributed to vehicle emissions. The remaining 15.5% originated from water heating boilers, small-scale heating systems, and other sources, such as the main reservoir of thermal power plants. According to the Mongolian Statistical Information Center, the proportion of households living in Ger districts has decreased from 50.2% in 2020 to 44% in 2024. Despite the decline, 28.2% of nitrogen dioxide, a major component of air pollution, still originates from industrial districts, while 63.2% now comes from vehicle emissions. This shift underscores the growing impact of vehicle emissions on air quality. Notably, 74.2% of 712,992 registered vehicles in capital are over 10 years old, contributing significantly to rising pollution. These older vehicles are likely less efficient and more polluting, which the study concludes is a key factor in the increase of air pollution in the city.
You're watching News Mongolia. Let's take a look at currency exchange rates provided by the Mongol Bank. Now let's shift our attention to foreign news provided by our international partner news agencies. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's government early Wednesday lifted the martial law he imposed during a tense night of political drama in which troops surrounded parliament and lawmakers voted to reject military rule.
존경하는 국민 여러분.
Dear respected citizens, last night at 11 p.m., I declared martial law with a firm resolve to protect the country from anti-state forces that were attempting to paralyze the essential functions of the state and collapse the constitutional order of liberal democracy. However, just a moment ago, the parliament demanded the lifting of the martial law, so I have ordered the withdrawal of the military forces deployed for this purpose. I will accept the Parliament's request and lift martial law through a cabinet meeting. However, although I immediately convened a cabinet meeting, the quorum for resolution has not yet been met due to the early hour, so I will lift it as soon as the quorum is reached. However, I request that the Parliament immediately ceases the reckless actions that are paralyzing the functions of the state, such as repeated impeachment, legislative manipulation, and budget manipulation. Yoon said his government withdrew military personnel following a bipartisan parliamentary vote that rejected martial law, and the measure was formally lifted around 4:30 a.m. during a cabinet meeting. Yoon declared martial law late Tuesday, vowing to eliminate anti-state forces as he struggles against an opposition that controls the country's parliament and that he accuses of sympathizing with communist North Korea. Less than 3 hours later, Parliament voted to lift the declaration, with National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-shik declaring that the martial law was invalid and that lawmakers will protect democracy with the people. The president's surprising move harkened back to an era of authoritarian leaders that the country has not seen since the 1980s, and it was immediately denounced by the opposition and the leader of Yoon's own party. Protesters clashed with police in the Georgian capital for the sixth night, running on Tuesday after the government's decision last week to suspend negotiations to join the European Union. Footage showed protesters firing fireworks toward riot police, who responded with tear gas. Georgia's Interior Ministry said Tuesday that 293 protesters were detained on administrative charges and 5 arrested on criminal charges. The ruling Georgian Dream Party retained control of parliament in the disputed October 26 parliamentary election, which was widely seen as a referendum on Georgia's EU aspirations. The opposition and the pro-Western president have accused the governing party of rigging the vote with neighboring Russia's help and boycotted parliament sessions. Mass opposition protests sparked by the vote gained new momentum after the governing party's decision on Thursday to put the EU accession talks on hold. The Georgian government's announcement of the EU accession talks suspension came hours after the European Parliament adopted a resolution criticizing October's election as neither free nor fair. On Monday, the EU reiterated its serious concerns about the continuous democratic backsliding of the country. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze of Georgian Dream declared Tuesday that the government is willing to open EU accession talks if the bloc ends its blackmail. 6 prison guards and 2 inmates were detained on Tuesday following a police operation in 11 Colombian prisons aimed at combating extortion, police said. The operation was carried out by more than 600 officers, including specialist units, as well as a fleet of helicopters set up to monitor the prisons, officials said. With the aerial capabilities aboard a Black Hawk to supervise the operation to target prisons in Colombia, hitting the criminals that are making some of these places become insecure, who from there are affecting the well-being of Colombians, these machines are available for the police operatives.
Extortion has been a growing concern among authorities in Colombia. Between January and October this year, 10,208 cases of extortion have been recorded, compared to 8,629 in the same period last year, according to the public figures from the Defense Ministry. Police raided some of the country's highest security prisons, such as La Picota in Bogota and La Tramacua in Valledupar. From prisons, extortionists often call their victims with threatening messages, giving personal details or claiming to be part of illegal armed groups. In the police operation, more than 300 mobile phones were seized, which are prohibited in prisons, as well as 408 bladed weapons and 6,641 grams of drugs, including marijuana and cocaine, according to the police.
Well, that's all for today. Thank you for staying with us. We'll see you tomorrow with more news and updates. Good night.